to that. Dahil sa dulo po, Mr. President, we stand for Philippine sovereignty.
Yeah, I could, Mr. President, but it would do no good. You know, that's the point. The point of diplomacy, lalo po kung wala pong world power na mag-enforce, is that we have to align a policy with strategy that something that can actually get done. And when
But
we
Mr.
compare
President-
Mr. President, may I finish? If you compare the strategy of of the Aquino administration and the Duterte administration, makikita nyo po sa Aquino administration nawalan tayo ng territory, na take over po ang Scarborough. Sa Duterte administration, ni isang square inch po walang nawala sa atin. In the Aquino administration, and tax, but the fact is for 3 years during the Duterte administration, nagkakawayan yung Coast Guard ng Pilipinas at ng China. The fact is, it's true, we have very good relationship with Vietnam and Malaysia, pero kasama ang China, hindi pwedeng makipag-usap ang Taiwan diretso sa ASEAN. Ang nakikipag-usap ang China sa Declaration of Conduct, yung Section 5 po, kasama ang China doon, hindi lang ang Vietnam at Malaysia. And it is not true that Malaysia and Vietnam does not tell our Navy that they are in Vietnamese or Malaysian waters. Palapitin mo yung mga barko sa mga hawak ng Malaysia at Vietnam, pareho din sa ginagawa ng Pilipinas, pareho din ginagawa ng China. Let me show you a chart, and let the public let the public decide. No, can you show how many? Please show on the board how many features are controlled by China, by Malaysia and Vietnam inside our exclusive economic zone, please. May I ask permission to the Senate President that we will put it there.
Please proceed.
So, ayan po, no? Let me put it on my phone so that I can also. So, 4 po ang claim ng China na nasa loob ng EEZ natin. Next slide, please. 11 po ang nasa ng Vietnam. So, hindi po totoo na mas grabe po ang isang country over the other, no? Magulo talaga etong dispute na to, no? Next slide. Malaysia has 5 and Taiwan 1, but binibilang yon under China, no? I'll give you an example, no? Number 43, Swallow Reef. Can you show the picture of Swallow Reef? Okay, yan po ang picture ng Swallow Reef. It is militarized. Dekada na po yan. Pinakita na rin po yan ng mga think tank sa US. Hindi po chismis or hindi po bali-balita lang na bago ngayon na ang mga features ng Malaysia at Vietnam ay militarized. Kausapin niyo po Navy at saka ang ating pong Coast Guard. Lumapit po kayo dyan. Kinausap ko po sila as Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Sasabihan din po sila, you are in Vietnamese waters. You are in Malaysian waters. Di ba? So the truth is, the US think tanks ignored putting that front and center because iba po ang interest ng US sa atin. Sa atin po ang interest natin, sovereignty, territory, and sovereign rights. Ang US po, ang kanilang interest po ay yung freedom of navigation. Ang US po ay hindi nakapirma sa UNCLOS. Ang US po, hindi officially tinatanaw yung pong arbitral award natin because hindi sila signatory sa UNCLOS. I've spoken to people in the White House, I've spoken to senators and members of Congress. Bakit po ang US Joint Patrol hindi nila ino-offer near Vietnam and Malaysia? So that's what I'm saying, Mr. President. But before I continue,
Let me just ask our distinguished colleague, if you can show that in the map of where the vicinity of that particular island is so that we can see the comparison on where it is, no, within the
yes. Well,
the,
Mr. President,
area. Because if it is closer to Malaysia, then I would understand.
no, this is in our EEZ, Mr. President.
Yes, correct. But
So,
it would be nice if somebody could point
Yeah,
out.
I'll show you all the pictures, Mr. President, but at the end of the interpellation, ang proposal ko po kasi ay dapat po ang National Task Force mag-briefing sa atin sa committee. Because we agree and we are all outraged about the actions of China. But is the UN General Assembly the right forum for us to get justice? I'm not saying it's the wrong forum. What I'm saying is that under our Constitution and jurisprudence, the chief architect is the President. It has never been the House or the Senate. So it is the president who will say what is the strategy, where we will go. But Mr. President, with your permission, I'll just show the other pictures. Pakita
In the
natin yung
meantime,
ibang
Mr.
pictures.
President, good gentleman, while the good gentleman is pulling up the other pictures, if I may just make a few comments on some of the important points he has mentioned. Hindi lang iisang bansa ang may interest sa freedom of navigation. As the good Senate President said in his sponsorship speech of this resolution, napakaraming bansa at napakaraming regional formations all over the world ay may interest sa freedom of navigation dahil napakaraming bansa sa buong mundo ay mga coastal nations din. Hindi kasama sa UNCLOS yung isang world power, ganun din. Ang China, hindi rin siya kasama sa UNCLOS. Pero hindi tama na hindi tinatanaw ng mga ibang global powers tulad ng US yung arbitral award. So, it might be ironic, ang US hindi member ng UNCLOS pero kinikilala nila yung ating tagumpay sa The Hague, and more countries and regional formations all over the world have done so. In fact, bumebuelo yung international consensus around us. If we talk to the Navy, if we talk to the armed forces, ang sasabihin po nila na yung single na pinakamalaking threat ngayon sa ating national security ay walang iba kundi ang China dahil sa kanyang aggressive action sa atin sa West Philippine Sea. And is the UN General Assembly the right forum? It is one of the right fora. Because I agree with the good gentleman, Mr. President, hindi solong mode of engagement lang tayo. So we hold on to our victory at The Hague, and now, after that historic ruling, or jurisprudence, we are seeking now also the diplomatic and political support of all other member countries in the United Nations. And indeed, the President is the architect of our foreign policy. Kaya nga po, pati sa lengguwahe ng resolution, which I am open to amendments to, Mr. President, for example, in the dispositive portion, dahil sila ang arkitekto ng ating foreign policy. Kaya nga po, ang lengguwahe ng resolusyong ito ay addressed to the Philippine government through the Department of Foreign Affairs. Bilang sila ang alter ego ni Presidente ng arkitekto ng foreign
It's
policy.
just a sense of the
Yes,
Senate.
Mr. President.
It is a sense of the Senate
Opo.
asking our executive department, who is the chief policy maker, particularly the president, to take action on this.
Yes, Mr. President.
We'll go to that, Mr. President. Now, may we show the Vietnam, start tayo dun sa picture, no? Ito Vietnam, ito po ang Quezon Reef. Meron pong ZPU-57-2 anti-aircraft artillery, may open radar, may armed personnel at gun encampment, may air raid shelter, may battle tank with personnel manning, meron po tong dish antenna, meron pong gun emplacement with personnel manning ng QJZ-89 12.77mm HMG. Meron pong battle tank with personnel manning inside sa kabilang side. Next slide. You have the Vietnam occupied Bailang K. It has a lighthouse, newly constructed temporary shelter a few years ago pa to. Gun emplacement concrete bunker, 2-story rectangular concrete with solar power heater installed on the roof. It has speedboats, trenches, open array radar, battle tank gun shelters. Next slide. Observation tower with solar panels, open array radar, napakalapit sa atin bansa to. Antenna for mobile phones, it has a battle tank, ongoing construction of trenches, it has personal work. Ito po ay sa Sincoe East Reef, Vietnam. Next slide. Ito po yung Pugad Island. Sa Pugad Island po may gun shelter, makikita nyo po may quay siya, meaning pwede pong pumasok yung iba't ibang klaseng ships nila. Meron din pong reclamation yan, may helipad, may ZPU-57-2 anti-aircraft artillery, may battle tanks, etc. So, just as we go through this, no, it will show
But my
you...
dear colleague, no, if I may, nainggit nga ako sa Vietnam eh. Nainggit ako sa kanila. Actually, these military fortifications is not because of us. It's also because of China.
No, that is in
To
our
be honest,
EEZ.
their number one aggressor in that particular
No,
portion
Mr.
is
President,
also with China.
I take exception to that. You know why?
How come?
That is in our EEZ. So you cannot say that that's only against China, that's also against us. If our military goes near Kalansiao K now, the Vietnamese tell us that is Vietnamese land. So meaning, if we win and suddenly China leaves the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, hindi po tayo ang makakakuha ng aalisan ng China. Ang
Then,
Malaysia...
Mr. President.
May I just finish?
Yes, Mr. President.
Historically kasi, yung pushback ng Vietnam has been very successful when it came to Chinese aggression on the West Philippine Sea. So, as a matter of fact, we had a whole delegation. I'm not sure if you joined us when we had the delegation of the Vietnamese Parliament and Speaker of the Vietnamese Parliament with us here, the Communist Parliament of Vietnam. We had a lengthy discussion upstairs in our ceremonial hall on how they really push back.
Yes.
And they really do not allow.
Agree, Mr. President. And I communicated that to the US, that Vietnam can give a bloody nose to any of its enemies.
Anyone.
That's why magdadalawang isip ka, just like Mig Subiri who has a black belt, magdadalawang isip ka makipagsuntukan. But the problem is that the military equipment given to us, walang weaponry. And in the $680 million South China Sea Fund in 2017-2018, it was Vietnam at Malaysia ang malaking nakuha, hindi Pilipinas. So, Mr. President, I'm not saying nakalaban natin ang Vietnam at Malaysia. Ha? Vietnam and Malaysia are our allies as of now, but they're also claimants. And what I'm saying is that they have a clear strategy. Improve their economy, bilaterally negotiate with China, and then build their defenses. So what I'm saying is that two of them, hindi natin pwedeng ignore. Let's go to the Malaysian held features. No, this is one.
Mr. President, and good gentleman.
May I just finish
Just about Vietnam, good gentleman, before we move on to your
Yes.
photos about Malaysia. Of course, Mr. President, the good gentleman could also sponsor a resolution calling on the DFA to file a case in the Permanent Court of Arbitration against Vietnam. This resolution is not mutually exclusive to that. Dahil sa dulo po, Mr. President, we stand for Philippine sovereignty.
Yeah, I could, Mr. President, but it would do no good. You know, that's the point. The point of diplomacy, lalo po kung wala pong world power na mag-enforce, is that we have to align a policy with strategy that something that can actually get done. And when
But
we
Mr.
compare
President-
Mr. President, may I finish? If you compare the strategy of of the Aquino administration and the Duterte administration, makikita nyo po sa Aquino administration nawalan tayo ng territory, na take over po ang Scarborough. Sa Duterte administration, ni isang square inch po walang nawala sa atin. In the Aquino administration, and it's not the fault of President Aquino, it was the strategy and the people implementing the strategy. Ang isang strategy po doon, hindi makipag-usap sa China, nakikipag-usap po sa multilateral, hindi po nakapasok ang ating fishermen around Scarborough. During the Duterte administration, nakapasok po tayo doon. Bakit po? Kasi po nag-uusap bilaterally, which is in the arbitration award, meron po, it is in UNCLOS, and it is also in the declaration of yung conduct. Yung binabanggit kanina po ng the good Senator Hontiviros, binabanggit niya nag-uusap kasi sa ASEAN. Kasi po may DOC, no? And yung DOC na yon should go to the Code of Conduct, COC. And China is working with ASEAN with that. But ang sabi ng China, wag tayo mag-multilateral sa iba because the other world powers have other interests. And if you look at Malaysian and Vietnamese strategy, they are talking with ASEAN and with China. They are not going to the Court of Arbitration, nor are they going to the UN General Assembly. That's what I'm saying. I'm
So
not saying it's the
therefore-
wrong strategy. I'm saying you can look back in history and see the results of the two. And I'm saying that the Senate should tread carefully and get the right information, kompletuhin. Kasi kanina lang, sinabi ni Senator Hontiveros, hindi naman ganun kasi ang Malaysia at Vietnam. But now with the pictures, makikita nyo. Yung iba sa atin dito, hanggang ngayon, nagugulat. When I briefed the military, some in the military, especially if they're not in the Navy, hindi nila alam na ganito din ang sitwasyon. Some of the US members of Congress did not know that the US was favoring Vietnam and Malaysia. That's why when President Obama went to Japan at tinanong siya in the dispute of the islands between China and Japan, if China tries to access that island, will it automatically trigger Section 5, which is the Mutual Defense Treaty? Sabi ng Obama, yes. Then he went to the Philippines, tinanong siya, kung may problema dito sa South China Sea at itong mga exclusive economic zone natin and everything, no? Will it trigger Section 5 of our Mutual Defense Treaty? Ang sagot ni Obama, no. So may I correct, just for the record, Senator Hontiveros, US is not a signatory to UNCLOS. They congratulate us on the award, but it is not their national policy to implement the UNCLOS.
Yun na nga po
Ang
sinabi ko,
Amerika,
Mr. President.
fini-cheer yung decision, pero hindi niya policy na i-implement yung decision.
Actually,
So
Mr.
we
President,
talked directly with the US and told the US, give us a contractor, a service contractor, we will build for oil, send us a ship na bantayan. Ang sagot nila, hindi yan sa policy namin. But
Mr.
we want,
President,
but
good
we want,
gentleman.
may I finish my sentence? So the point is, the good senator was saying, freedom of navigation sa lahat. Ang number one na may interest sa freedom of navigation, magugulat man tayo, is China. Bakit po? Because 80% ng ekonomiya ng China ay nasa coastal areas niya and mostly malapit sa atin yung southern, di ba? So actually, yung sinasabi ng US na freedom of navigation, yun din ang gusto ng China. Ang unang magsasuffer kung may gera around the South China Sea is China. Ang pangalawang magsasuffer tayo kasi maiipit tayo sa gitna eh. Ang Malaysia at Vietnam ay meron pong strategy na nakikipag-away sila sa China sa territory nila, pero hindi po sila gumigitna sa dalawang superpower na US at saka China.
Problema natin siguro dyan, Senator Cayetano, is magandang makipag-usap kung yung kausap mo ay matino. Sa totoo lang. Ang problema, kausap ni President Marcos, first state visit niya ay China. Nakausap niya po si President Xi, and during that meeting, they were very cordial, very friendly, at nagsabi po nila, they will continue to engage on freedom of navigation or movement within the West Philippine Sea. Wala pang ilang linggo na dumaan, ayun na po yung pag-take over na po ng green lighting or mga
Green lace.
harassment ng ating mga white ships po ito, Coast Guard and our fisher folk. As a matter of fact, since then, the President has called the ambassador several times to Malacanang. If you ask me, I would have been more harsh, actually. So, mahirap ang kumausap sa isang bansa na hindi man naman matino. You started with your speech by saying that it was a phrase from the Bible. Fortunately, our friends in China do not believe in God, and nor do we believe in the Bible. Because I remember talking to one and I said, "Are you Buddhist?" Sabi niya, "No, I'm communist." So wala silang pinapaniwala na Diyos. So tayo, naniniwala po tayo sa Diyos, takot po tayo kay Allah and to God. Mahirap kausapin yung isang bansa na hindi po takot sa kay Allah o kay God kasi wala po lang
Mr. President.
pinapaniwala.
Mr. President,
I will just end by saying, I'll just end this statement by saying is, if there were goodwill measures being done by that particular country to our discussions and negotiations, di wala po sana tayong problema. Unfortunately, even in our embassy here, nangyari na sa akin yan. Ako hindi naman nabudol, pero I was thrown under the bus when he told me something about Pogo and I shared it to everybody. Ang sabi niya, kasinungalingan, ay pala, totoo pala ang sinabi niya, and I can prove it with the witnesses that were with me there. Then a month after, about the incident of the Navy boat, yung kinuha nila, yung debris from the Chinese rocket that fell, sabi nila it was a mutually mutual understanding where they gladly gave us the debris to take back to China. And lumabas yung video, sinisigawan, naubusan nga ng English yung ating Navy frogman.
Well, Mr.
Galit na
President.
galit siya. Ang ginagawa nyo, what are you doing? Tapos, we have it here. It was shown in video here. So these are the things that does not happen with Vietnam, nor does it happen with Malaysia, because we have a mutual respect for one another.
Mr. President, that is
So,
my point
President,
precisely.
My point is, it's very hard to talk to
My
another
point
party.
precisely, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Malaysia and Vietnam. Let me address the Senate President because he addressed my comments.
Well, I'm trying to address the good gentleman's many points that are accumulating.
Sorry,
Mr. President.
Senator Hontiviros. I was just also addressing your points. Actually, hindi pa tapos ipakita yung pictures ng Malaysia. No? But yung point ni Senate President, Sir Senate President, as I said, I share with you the outrage. I share with you the frustration, ba't nangyayari to, ba't kinausap ng Presidente. But I also see the historical past. Ng panahon ni President Duterte, layer after layer ng communication hanggang maayos to prevent. I don't know if this chamber was informed. There was even a time for almost 2 months, may get 1 month. Hindi nagsasagutan ng telepono ang ating Coast Guard at China. Pero during the Duterte administration, pinagbawal ng both sides na hindi sagutin ng both sides yung telepono ng Coast Guard. Kasi sabi nila, di ba na mag-away yung gray ship, yung hindi pwede na yung Coast Guard na kung saan may emergency, hindi nag-uusap. So my point is, Mr. President, precisely why Mali, it's not happening between the Philippines and Malaysia at Vietnam, but it's also not happening between Vietnam and Malaysia and China is because they found a way to work it out without other superpowers, and may malinaw na usapan. Is Vietnam and Malaysia satisfied? Of course not, because they believe it's theirs. Are we satisfied? No also. But I'm saying, Mr. President, in our desire to do something, we have to ask first, tama po ba nasa UNGA? Secondly, in our desire to do something against the biggest one, dahil mas malaki ekonomiya, mas marami sila, mas malakas ang kanilang Navy, do we ignore our problems naman with Vietnam and Malaysia? And lastly, Mr. President, yes, mali kung nagsabi ang China na hiningi nila. But again, I mentioned this to the majority leader. Under international law, kung meron kang something in space at mahulog, hindi pwede kunin ng ibang country yon. The only thing you can do is inform that country at sila kukuha. So kung may nahulog galing sa satellite ng China sa Pilipinas, ang obligasyon ng Pilipinas, tawagan ng China at kunin. Hindi rin pwedeng makipag-agawan ang tao natin. Baliktarin man natin ang sitwasyon. Sinabi ni Pangulong Marcos, may 2 tayong bagong satellite. Pag yan po nahulog, let's say in between the waters of Hong Kong and mainland, we cannot get it. The Chinese cannot get it. They're obligated to tell us. Ngayon, kung may miscommunication or they lied to us, mali, I do not excuse that. No? I was a very tough negotiator. Grabe po ang mga sinabi ko behind closed doors because yun po ang instruction ni President Duterte. Remember, a diplomat cannot say anything of his personal opinion. Only that of the instructions of the chief diplomat. So that's what my point here today, Mr. President. The chief diplomat has not stated that he wants this taken up sa UN. And yes, we're not a rubber stamp. And yes, may sariling pag-iisip ang Senate. Pero ang konstitusyon mismo nagsasabi na dapat ang presidente ang may diskarte at jurisprudence ay nagpapatunay nun. Sabi po dito, Pimentel versus Executive Secretary, GR 158088, July 6, 2005. In our system of government, the President, being the head of state, is regarded as the sole organ and authority in external relation and is the country's sole representative with foreign nations. This would put the Senate and Executive in an awkward position and could cause embarrassment in the Senate if the President orders the DFA not to file the resolution. On the other hand, if it is going to file the resolution, why not hear this in committee, get the input of the National Task Force, get the input of 24 senators, and strengthen it? There's another question of, is it the General Assembly or is it the Security Council? Because in cases where peace is at stake, the Security Council has the authority. Or is it a case of implementation? So should we go back to the permanent court of arbitration? So that's my point, Mr. President. Even I'm not saying malito, but I'm not also saying tama. Bakit? Hindi ko po naririnig kung anong instructions ng presidente sa DFA. Hindi ko pa po naririnig ang ambassador natin sa US. Ano yung sinasabi niyang bagong guarantee ni President Biden? Yan po ba ay guarantee sa freedom of navigation lang or pwede na tayong mag-dig for oil? Pwede na tayong mag-drill? So this is such a complex. But I would agree with you, Mr. President. I see your passion. I talk to you in the back in your office, and you are just, full of frustration na ang linaw naman na sa atin to. But as I'm saying, Mr. President, Malaysia has its frustrations, Vietnam has its frustrations, even China sometimes has its frustrations with other countries, with world powers, and even with dealing with us. For example, Mr. President, meron tayong meron tayong agreement, walang magtatayo. There was a time that some of our fishermen with some of our personnel tried to put nipa hats. Sabi, pahingahan lang daw. So syempre, nag-react yung China. And magalit man yung iba, tama sila mag-react. Bakit? Pumirma po si Blas Ople dun sa ASEAN sa agreement na pag bakante yung mga island, mga features, wala muna magtatayo ng kahit ano. And President Duterte asked me, Alan, ba't tayo hindi pwede magtayo ng kubo? Para lang naman shelter ng fishermen yon. Sir President, I will give you 2 reasons bakit hindi pwede. Number 1, yung declaration of conduct. Number 2, yun ang ginawa ng Chinese eh. Sabi nila kubo lang, then ngayon punong-puno na. So alam na nila yung style na yon, kaya worry sila pag yung iba. So do I condemn them for doing that? Yes. Dapat yan wala. Dapat walang nakatayo sa mga island na yan. Tayo lang po, sa lahat ng claimant, tayo lang po ang disente, so to speak. Bakit po? Basic lang ang binibigay natin sa ating mga militar na nandun. Hindi natin minimilitarize to the point na it becomes a threat to our neighbors. But as the pictures would show, the Malaysian pictures, the Vietnam, this is a threat to our national security. Meron na pong submarines ang Vietnam at Malaysia. Pag ang China po ay nag-retreat at umalis dun sa mga islands na hawak po nila, malaki po ang problema natin. Bakit? Ngayon po yung consensus madali kasi malaki yung China. So madaling sabihin po, bully sila. Pero po ang Malaysia is smaller than us. So if we have a dispute with Malaysia, what will the US say? And will we be the bully or will Malaysia be the bully? Ganon din sa Vietnam. So, Mr. President,
yes.
the point I want to make, no, and I can wrap up or we can continue, is that I really appeal to you, to the body, let us fully take this up in the committee. Kung kailangan 2 linggo, araw-araw, lahat ng briefing, lahat ng, kung kailangan in your chamber, kausapin din natin yung Chinese ambassador if we have to get think tanks from Southeast Asia, because it's just so important. And I guarantee you, no, if we simply pass this resolution, tapon lang natin sa UNGA, madi-disappoint tayo. Because history has proven what I'm saying, na the UNGA is for consensus. It is not for highly contentious issues like this.
Mr.
It may work,
President,
may not
good
work,
gentleman.
but just my last point, Madam, sir, my last point is, it's so important that if we don't get all the information, study it well, and craft maybe help the DFA craft the resolution itself, kung yun ang decision natin, baka maging negative pa sa atin to later on. So let me stop there and thank you for your patience, Senator Hontiviros and Senate President.